I think that Malaysia is a very unique country when we talk about startup, because you're talking about a country that's extremely multicultural instead of multi-ethnic, which is what most other countries are. It has with multiculturalism, you get very different religion, types of people. It's also an emerging market as well. So buying power is very different in Malaysia compared to many developed nations across the world. So we have a very healthy, I would say, a very healthy startup ecosystem with huge support from both government and private sector as well, which has led to quite a few success stories. In fact, 7 out of 10 of the biggest tech IPO in the last several years has come out of Malaysia.
And I think one of the biggest companies that has risen from Malaysia has been Grab. So Grab's obviously the Uber equivalent in Southeast Asia and the unicorn company in this region. There's a lot of government support in Malaysia through institutions such as MAGIC and MDEC, which is the Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation. And I think unlike other Southeast Asian nations outside of Singapore, there's definitely a lot of support and an ecosystem.
I think it's still in the early stages. I mean, definitely compared to countries like Singapore, Singapore probably has a more mature ecosystem with established players and parties that help boost the ecosystem. Malaysia, we are probably a few years behind. So there are specific government agencies that are set up to help startups. There are enough funding opportunities for startups, and I think things like co-working spaces and grants. These are all there. That said, I think the number of companies that have started in the last 5 years, Malaysian companies especially, and those companies, a lot of those companies actually successfully raised funds and went into another country.
So in Malaysia, compared to the rest of the other ASEAN countries, it's probably one of the more mature ones. And if you have studied the number of startups or companies that have gone for IPO, Malaysia has the most number of companies that gone IPO compared to the rest of the region. I'm Andrew. I'm the CEO and founder of MAD Incubator. We are the largest private incubator in Southeast Asia. I think the startup ecosystem in Malaysia has matured over the years, and I think primarily because of MAGIC. The establishment of MAGIC actually helped to accelerate the entrepreneurship awareness of creating a startup in Malaysia.
My name is Eon. I'm the Executive Director of Social Entrepreneurship here at MAGIC, or the Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Centre. MAGIC is a government agency that's established by the Malaysian government to try to spearhead innovation and creativity in Malaysia, with a bigger focus across the ASEAN market as well. Within MAGIC itself, we have two big units. One department looks at entrepreneurship development, and the other big department looks at social entrepreneurship development, which is the department that I look after. I think that we're seeing a huge support coming into the startup ecosystem here in Malaysia. From a social entrepreneurship is a slightly different story. Malaysia is very lucky to be a country that's going towards a developed nation state, but you still have quite a bit of a social issue that we have to solve, and social entrepreneurship is very new in Malaysia compared to countries like UK, US, Thailand, Vietnam, South Korea, but we're definitely seeing a lot of momentum. MAGIC social entrepreneurship has only been established in the last 1 year, and in the last 1 year itself, we've seen tremendous growth, both in the number of social enterprises, but also in terms of the support from public and private sector towards social entrepreneurship.
I am Carl, the CEO and co-founder of Servicer. Servicer is a mobile app that connects local service providers with consumers operating in Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. The startup ecosystem is relatively young in Malaysia, but there has recently been quite a lot of activity happening. So in Thailand, I think they're starting to do some work but the startup scene is very, very small. Same goes for the Philippines, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian nations. In Singapore, there certainly has been a lot of development in the startup space, and in fact, a lot of Malaysian companies go to Singapore at a later stage of funding.
My name is full name Lee Ching Wei. People call me Ching. Yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of iMoney Group. I would say Kuala Lumpur is probably 90-95% of where the sort of action is. It probably houses most of the startups. Many of them have their headquarters in KL. Penang is starting to gain reputation as a viable option to start a company as well. I think there are enough companies and examples of startups mushrooming from Penang. So Penang is north of Malaysia. I think they also have a pretty decent sort of setup in terms of I think it's a free trade zone in Penang, and that appeals to certain sort of classes of companies. And I think because it's an island, you sort of get to isolate, and from a hiring perspective, it's actually not too difficult as well.
Kuala Lumpur, obviously, as the biggest city within Malaysia, has the most advanced technical infrastructure, as well as the talent pool to support a startup ecosystem. There are definitely efforts to have other cities within Malaysia also develop their startup ecosystem. So in Johor Bahru and Penang are the two other larger cities within Malaysia. Penang has been home to a lot of hardware manufacturing in the past. So for instance, Dell Computer used to be based there, and I think they still are. And in Johor Bahru, obviously with its proximity with a startup hub like Singapore, also gets some follow-on impact. But by and large, it's Kuala Lumpur, which is the most active community, both in terms of the number of startups and the people that are involved within the ecosystem.
But the rest of Malaysia, I would say, it would be, to me, I classify them as tier 3. Tier 3 kinds of cities in terms of startup ecosystem. Practically, there's no very minimal activities there. Talent pool is a little bit lacking, but they could have a different kind of talent. For example, if you go to Kota Kinabalu in Sabah, you will find a lot more artistic talent, creative talent. But the problem is, when it comes to tier 3 cities, it's very difficult for you to convince them to jump into entrepreneurship. They look for something safer. So, but to me, as an incubator, these are all green fields. So these green fields eventually would spark off something. And that's why I prefer to focus more on tier 2 and tier 3 cities in Malaysia, not so much in KL right now.
It's not surprising to see that a majority of high growth startups, or the startups that have grown big, come out of Kuala Lumpur. Although we see that's kind of now slowly changing, there is startup communities across some of the other states. For example, Johor, which is down south towards Singapore, which I think makes a very interesting kind of relationship as well, because given that Singapore is a developed nation across the in ASEAN, so you have a very different market. And in Penang, there is a very healthy and fairly significant group of what we call it, the hardware startups as well. So it's slowly growing across Malaysia, but predominantly it's still focused in Kuala Lumpur.
I think some of the main challenges is that, first of all, in areas of innovation, Malaysian startups are not innovative at all. So we tend to see what is happening in other parts of the world and try to replicate that model into Malaysia. And again, if we were to do that, then where is your distinctive competence? Then you need money to scale fast, but you don't have the technology or business model that could actually be a barrier of entry to a lot of other competitors if they want to come into the market. So in the end, when your barrier of entry is low and people are coming into the market, then you'll be fighting with whatever money you can raise. Malaysian startups today are looking at, look, I came up with an idea, I want to get it funded before I proceed on. We're trying to change that mindset. Entrepreneurs in my era, which is from the 1990s, actually have no funding at all. We don't have government funding in the past. We don't have venture capital. We don't have angel investors. We only have family, friends, and fools. So, the third thing is actually it's about how you see the outside market compared to just the Malaysian market. So our startups need to look a little bit more wider in terms of market.
I think the key one is probably to continue to grow at a very high growth rate. So all this while, we've been around for 4 years now, and we've been growing at double, triple digits year on year, which is I think a very sort of respectable rate for a startup. But to keep this up, that's obviously more and more challenging. There's also a challenge in terms of growing not just within a country and within a vertical, but also expanding beyond Malaysia. And so we actually today operation in 4 countries. So Malaysia is where we are headquartered, but we have operations on the ground in Indonesia, Philippines, and Singapore. And the ambition is to very much replicate the same success in Malaysia in those countries as well. And so one of the challenge is to, whilst keeping up the growth rate, also simultaneously expand our regional reach very, very quickly.
So this organization started off in a coffee shop in February last year. So we literally were in a shopping mall coding this product. And to this day, we're about 60 people across 3 countries. So the biggest challenge for me right now is how do we maintain our momentum? How do we maintain the vision and the culture for the company as we expand so rapidly? So I spend a lot of my time visiting my other offices around the region, but also exploring new markets. What we've found in those new markets is that smartphone or internet speeds in those areas do not support our product. So we have to look at innovative ways that we can either adapt our product or actually look into partnering with infrastructure builders to make sure that our product can reach more and more small and medium-sized enterprises. Business is nothing but a team of people. So a continuing challenge for us is to make sure that we have world-class people that believe in our vision to create a world-class company from Kuala Lumpur.
Tough question. I would like to think that a lot of companies here can penetrate and offer services or products that have a global reach. I think you definitely have countries like US leading the way. China, a lot of Chinese companies have successfully gone global. Not enough Malaysian companies have done that. That said, I think we have the potential to do that. So even though there probably isn't like a straight sort of forward pathway that I can see companies of heading there, I would like to see more companies going global, for sure.
5 years ago, if you had said that you could start a global startup from Kuala Lumpur, people would probably think that you're crazy. So I'm really excited about the future of Malaysian startups, and especially startups originating from Malaysia to have more than just regional impact, but global impact.
I personally think that it's going to be an interesting time for the world when it comes to startup and entrepreneurship in general. There's a big conversation now about, for example, the Silicon Valley bubble. Is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? And I think most people now agree that it is a bit of a bubble. Unicorn startup, does it still exist? And how often is it going to come by? Are we going to find more of them or less of them? And a lot of people are now also agree that we're going to see less of these unicorn startups and stuff like that. So the capital market is slowly shifting, and we see a lot of shift as well. My personal belief is that we have to now start thinking about what do we want to ultimately achieve with entrepreneurship. Is it a promise of getting rich fast, or is it a promise of an equitable society that we're trying to achieve? If it's equitable society where we believe that the prosperity of the people is as important as the growth of the country, of the nation, we need to start thinking about entrepreneurship and startup very differently. The startups in Malaysia will start thinking about how do we use the platform of entrepreneurship as an opportunity to drive societal change for the greater good and the people as well, ensuring that we can create an equitable society and a prosperous society as well. I think that Malaysia is a very unique country when we talk about startup, because you're talking about a country that's extremely multicultural instead of multi-ethnic, which is what most other countries are. It has with multiculturalism, you get very different religion, types of people. It's also an emerging market as well. So buying power is very different in Malaysia compared to many developed nations across the world. So we have a very healthy, I would say, a very healthy startup ecosystem with huge support from both government and private sector as well, which has led to quite a few success stories. In fact, 7 out of 10 of the biggest tech IPO in the last several years has come out of Malaysia.
And I think one of the biggest companies that has risen from Malaysia has been Grab. So Grab's obviously the Uber equivalent in Southeast Asia and the unicorn company in this region. There's a lot of government support in Malaysia through
Malaysian companies especially, and those companies, a lot of those companies actually successfully raised funds and went, into another country.
So in Malaysia, compared to the rest of the other ASEAN countries, it's probably one of the more mature ones. And if you have studied the number of startups or companies that have gone for IPO, Malaysia has the most number of companies that gone IPO.
With established players and parties that help boost the ecosystem. Malaysia, we are probably a few years behind. So there are specific government agencies that are set up to help startups. There are enough funding opportunities for startups, and I think things like co-working spaces and grants. These are all there. That said, I think the number of companies that have started in the last 5 years.
Institutions such as Magic and MDEC, which is the Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation. And I think unlike other Southeast Asian nations outside of Singapore, there's definitely a lot of support and an ecosystem.
I think it's still in the early stages. I mean, definitely compared to countries like Singapore, Singapore probably has a more mature ecosystem.